The old gym at Fairview High had been renovated years ago, but the locker room beneath it remained untouched, a damp, echoing place where the smell of mildew clung to the walls no matter how much bleach was used. Only the boys' soccer team still used it, and even they avoided lingering after practice. Evan had never believed the stories about someone else being down there. He was a rational kid, the type to laugh at ghost rumors. That was before the Thursday night when his teammates left early, and he found himself the last one in the locker room. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly overhead, flickering every so often. Evan stood at his locker, pulling on his hoodie, when he heard it, a soft, drawn-out whisper. It was faint, almost too quiet to notice, but it was unmistakably his name, Evan. He froze, scanning the rows of metal lockers, their paint chipped and dented over decades of use. "Who's messing with me?" he called, his voice bouncing off the tiled walls. Silence followed, heavy, suffocating silence. Then came the sound of a locker door slowly creaking open, somewhere at the far end of the room. It wasn't his, he had his own right in front of him, but the metallic groan carried through the air. Heart pounding, he stepped cautiously toward the sound, sneakers squeaking against the damp floor. The door was ajar, swaying ever so slightly as if someone had just stepped away. Evan reached for it, and that's when he saw it. Inside, under a pile of old, moldy towels, something pale shifted, a hand. It wasn't human pink, but sickly white, the fingers too long, curling inwards before disappearing into the towels. Evan stumbled back, nearly tripping over the bench behind him. "This isn't funny," he said, louder this time, though his voice cracked. No answer. Instead, the whisper returned, now from directly behind him. "Evan, stay." He spun around, but the space behind him was empty. His breath came in shallow gasps, his chest tight. The air felt heavier, thicker, like the entire room had sunk underwater. The lights flickered once, twice, and went out. In the pitch-black silence, something cold brushed the back of his neck. He bolted for the exit, slamming his shoulder into the door. It gave way, and he stumbled up the narrow stairs into the gym, the bright overhead lights blinding him. His teammates' laughter echoed from the parking lot outside, and Evan stood there, shaking, unable to tell them what had happened. He never used that locker room again. Madison never liked staying late at Westbrook High. She was part of the yearbook club, and their meetings often dragged past sunset, leaving her to walk through the empty corridors to the front exit. The school was different at night, colder, the buzzing fluorescent lights giving everything a pale, unnatural tint. The janitors worked in near silence, their mops swishing faintly down the other end of the hall, but otherwise the building felt abandoned. That Tuesday night, the club finished late. Nearly 8 p.m. Madison slung her camera bag over her shoulder and made her way through the east wing, which was rarely used after hours. Her sneakers squeaked against the polished linoleum. Halfway down the hallway, she noticed something strange, a set of muddy footprints leading toward the old science lab. They were faint, as if someone had walked through wet soil, but the strange part was, they were bare footprints. No shoes. And they were heading away from the lab, not toward it. She slowed, her pulse quickening. The east wing doors were locked after 6 p.m. No one without a key could get in. A draft rolled past her, cold enough to raise goosebumps on her arms. From the science lab's direction, she heard a faint tapping, rhythmic, deliberate, like fingernails against glass. Madison swallowed hard and told herself it was just one of the janitors. But when she glanced down the hallway, she realized she could see the mop cart 2 hallways over. The janitor was nowhere near here. Curiosity overrode her better judgment, and she stepped toward the lab. The door's small glass window was smudged, making it hard to see inside. The tapping continued, slow and steady. Madison leaned closer, cupping her hands to block the hallway glare. That's when a face appeared in the glass, pale, with wide black eyes and no visible mouth. It was there for only a second before the lights overhead flickered, and when they came back on, the glass was empty, heart pounding. Madison backed away. But the footprints were different now. They didn't just lead away from the lab, they now led toward her. The tapping had stopped, but in the silence, she could hear the faint sound of breathing from just around the corner. She ran without looking back, vowing never to take that hallway again. Caleb wasn't the type to scare easily. As one of the school's best sketch artists, he often stayed after hours in the art room, lost in his work. The room itself was on the far end of the building, with tall windows that overlooked the empty football field. During the day, the space was bright and lively, full of chatter and the smell of acrylic paint. But at night, with the lights off in the rest of the building, it felt like a different world, still, shadowy, and unnervingly quiet. It was late Friday evening when Caleb realized he'd lost track of time. His phone read 9:12 p.m. The janitors had already left, he was alone. He gathered his pencils and sketchpad, but as he zipped his bag, something caught his attention, the sound of pages flipping. Not the light flutter of paper in the wind, but the deliberate turning of thick sketchbook sheets. The sound was coming from the back of the room, where old student art portfolios were stored in flat cabinets. Caleb froze, listening. The sound stopped. He told himself it was just the draft from the windows, but they were closed. Slowly, he walked toward the back, each step echoing on the tile floor. When he reached the cabinet, he noticed one of the drawers was slightly open. Inside lay a large sketchbook he didn't recognize, its cover cracked and worn. On instinct, he flipped it open, and immediately regretted it. Every page was filled with charcoal drawings of the school, but not as it was now. The hallways looked darker, the windows smeared with grime, the walls covered in strange markings. In one drawing, a pale figure stood at the end of a corridor, its face hidden, its body too thin and long. In another, the art room itself was shown, but through the window, Caleb could see his own reflection, drawn in unnerving detail, except, something was standing behind him. He dropped the book, his breath catching in his throat. A sudden stillness filled the room, so complete it felt unnatural. Then, from directly behind him, came a slow, steady inhale, as if someone was leaning close enough to smell the air around him. Caleb didn't turn. He didn't need to. He ran, leaving his bag, pencils, and the eerie sketchbook behind. He didn't stop until he was outside, and even then, he swore he could still hear the sound of a page turning somewhere in the dark. The Monday after Caleb's incident in the art room, the students at Fairview High shuffled into their homerooms as usual. Evan, still rattled from the locker room experience, sat slouched at his desk, headphones in, trying not to think about it. Their regular homeroom teacher was out sick, replaced by a tall, thin substitute with ash-gray hair and dark circles under her eyes. She didn't smile when she entered, she simply closed the door behind her and began taking attendance in a low, almost monotone voice. Halfway through the list, she paused at Evan's name. Her head tilted slightly, as if she were listening to something only she could hear. "You should stay away from the East Wing after dark," she said, her tone strangely flat. The whole class turned to look at her. "Excuse me?" Evan asked, uneasy. The substitute gave him a faint, almost pitying glance before continuing with the roll call as if she'd said nothing unusual. When the bell rang, Evan lingered, curious and unsettled. "Do I know you?" he asked her quietly as the other students left. She hesitated, then leaned closer so no one else could hear. "I've taught at other schools. Bad things follow certain places, and certain people." Her eyes locked with his, and for a brief moment, Evan swore her pupils stretched vertically, like a cat's. 3 schools, 3 sightings. The pale one doesn't like to be seen, but it's getting bolder. Evan felt a cold drop of dread run through him. The stories he'd overheard about something in the East Wing. Madison from Yearbook Club, and now this substitute, who seemed to know about things she shouldn't. "What are you talking about?" he pressed. But she just gave a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You'll know soon enough. Don't be alone when the lights go out." And with that, she walked out of the classroom, her footsteps barely making a sound. That night, Evan couldn't sleep. He kept replaying her words in his head: 3 schools, 3 sightings. He didn't know about Caleb's art room sketchbook, or Madison's hallway footprints, but something deep inside him felt certain, whatever had whispered his name in that locker room, wasn't finished with him. Madison was in the school library finishing up photo edits for the yearbook when the late afternoon light began to fade. The windows turned gold, then orange, then a dull gray as the sun sank below the trees. She hated the library after dark. It was too big, too quiet, the shelves looming like walls. But she'd promised the editor she'd finish sorting the sports section by Monday, so she stayed behind after the other students left. She wasn't alone for long. About 20 minutes later, she heard the soft thud of a chair being pulled out at one of the far tables. Looking up, she saw a boy she vaguely recognized from gym class, Evan. He dropped his bag onto the table and sat down, giving her a nod. "Hey," he said, "do you have the East Wing photos from last year? I need them for something." His voice sounded casual, but his eyes darted toward the windows as though he were listening for something outside. Before Madison could answer, the overhead lights flickered. It was brief, less than a second, but when they came back, both of them noticed the same thing: a tall, pale figure standing between two shelves at the far end of the room. Its body was impossibly thin, its head tilted in an unnatural angle. They froze, neither daring to move. The figure didn't advance. Instead, it stepped backward into the shadows until it was gone. Evan's voice was low and urgent. "You've seen it too, haven't you?" Madison nodded slowly, her throat dry. She told him about the bare footprints in the East Wing and the tapping on the science lab glass. He told her about the whisper in the locker room and the substitute's warning. Neither of them knew why it was here, or why it seemed to be at multiple schools, but one thing was clear: it wasn't just a story anymore. They decided to leave together, sticking close as they packed their things. But when they passed the row of shelves where the figure had been, they noticed something chilling: a single sheet of yellowed paper on the floor. On it was a detailed charcoal drawing of the library, and in the drawing, the two of them were standing exactly where they were now, except the figure was right behind them. By Thursday, Evan and Madison had exchanged more than a few frantic texts. Both had trouble sleeping, and both had seen glimpses of movement in reflective surfaces, store windows, darkened classrooms, even their own phone screens when the display went black. They didn't tell anyone else. Who would believe them? But they decided one thing: if either of them saw the figure again, they wouldn't face it alone. That afternoon, they met in the school library again, intending to search old yearbooks for anything unusual, maybe past incidents no one talked about. It was almost 5 p.m. when the last few students left, leaving them alone with the smell of old paper and the hum of the overhead lights. Madison flipped through the 1987 yearbook, her brow furrowed. "Look at this," she said, sliding it toward Evan. In the background of several group photos, barely visible, was a tall, pale blur, always at the edge of the frame. Before Evan could reply, the lights flickered, once, twice, then went out completely, plunging the library into a suffocating blackness. The hum of the air conditioning stopped. Even the emergency exit signs failed to glow. The silence was absolute. Madison's phone light snapped on, casting a narrow beam, but instead of comfort, it only seemed to make the shadows deeper. From somewhere in the darkness came the faint sound of pages turning, slow, deliberate, echoing as if every book in the room was flipping itself open. Then, a whisper, stretched and distorted: "Together now." Evan grabbed Madison's arm. "Move. Now." They headed for the nearest exit, their flashlight beam shaking with each step. As they reached the main aisle, they both saw it: the pale figure standing less than 10 feet away, its head bent low, impossibly long arms dangling toward the floor. The moment the light hit its face, the figure snapped upright. In the brief, horrible instant before Madison dropped the phone, she saw its mouth, a wide, black void where teeth should be, stretching far too wide to be human. The phone clattered to the ground, its beam spinning wildly. By the time she scooped it up, the figure was gone, but every single book in the library was open to the same page: a charcoal drawing of two students, running. Caleb hadn't been back to the art room since the night he found the sketchbook, but the images from its pages haunted him. Every time he tried to draw something else, his pencil would drift into the same shapes: dark hallways, tall figures, windows with shadowed faces. When he noticed a flyer for the yearbook club needing extra photographers, he thought joining might distract him, or at least put him around other students after hours instead of working alone. That Thursday, he showed up to the library for what he thought was a casual meeting. Instead, he found Evan and Madison hunched over a table stacked with old yearbooks and photocopied newspaper articles. They looked up in surprise when he walked in. "You're Caleb, right?" Madison asked. He nodded, setting his sketchpad down. "Do either of you know anything about something following people?" His voice was quiet, almost embarrassed. But the look on their faces told him they did. In minutes, all three were trading stories. Caleb's voice shook as he described the charcoal drawings in the old sketchbook. Evan and Madison's faces paled when he mentioned the tall figure with its head tilted at impossible angles. Evan told him about the substitute's warning. Madison showed him a photo she'd taken months ago during a sports banquet. In the far corner of the frame, blurred but unmistakable, was the same pale figure. They were still talking when the classroom door, which had been open, swung shut on its own. The sound was loud in the empty hallway beyond. A sudden chill seeped into the room, and the fluorescent lights buzzed, dimming to a sickly yellow. Slowly, from the back corner, the sound of a pencil scratching against paper began. Caleb's sketchpad was lying open on the table. His hand wasn't touching it, but the pencil was moving across the page, sketching by itself. The three of them watched as the drawing took shape, a detailed picture of their classroom, exactly as it was now. The final detail the pencil added was a fourth figure, standing in the doorway. All three turned at once. The doorway was empty, but the handle began to turn, slowly, steadily, from the other side. The three didn't wait around to see who, or what, was on the other side of the classroom door. Caleb slammed it shut and locked it, and they bolted through the adjoining hallway exit, hearts pounding. Once they were outside, catching their breath under the cold glow of a street lamp, Evan finally said what had been building between them for days: "We need to find her. The substitute. She knows what's going on." It wasn't easy. The school office claimed they had no record of a substitute matching Evan's description: ash-gray hair, sunken eyes, tall frame. But Madison remembered seeing her name on the attendance sheet that day: Ms. Greaves. A quick online search turned up a surprise: she'd been listed as a faculty member at 2 other schools in the state, both of which had been shut down years earlier due to structural damage. Newspaper archives told a darker story: both schools had been plagued by disappearances. That night, they followed a hunch and drove to an address listed under her name. It was a small, run-down house on the edge of town, its windows dark, its front yard overgrown. As they approached, the front door creaked open before they could knock. Ms. Greaves stood in the doorway, her eyes glinting in the porch light. "I told you not to be alone after dark," she said. "Now it's too late." Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and old paper. The living room was cluttered with stacks of sketchbooks, each filled with the same kind of drawings Caleb had seen: distorted hallways, faceless students, and the pale figure, always watching. Ms. Greaves explained in a low voice: "It feeds on attention. The more you look for it, the more it looks back. It's older than this town. Older than the schools. And it doesn't let go once it's chosen you." Her eyes flickered strangely in the lamplight, the pupils stretching vertically again, just like Evan had seen before. Before they could question her further, the lights in the house went out. The sound of shifting paper filled the dark, coming from every corner at once. Ms. Greaves' voice dropped to a whisper: "It's already here." In the window behind her, lightning briefly illuminated the street, and in that flash, they saw the pale figure standing in the yard, closer than it had ever been before. The storm outside Ms. Greaves' house raged for hours, the thunder shaking the thin walls. None of them slept. Every so often, one of them would see movement in the yard, the pale figure drifting just beyond the reach of the lightning, as if pacing, waiting. By dawn, Evan's nerves were shot. "We can't keep hiding," he said. "It's not going away. We have to end this." Caleb and Madison exchanged uneasy glances, but neither disagreed. Ms. Greaves sat in her armchair, hands folded, watching them with a tired, almost resigned expression. "You can't kill it," she said. "But you might be able to bind it, for a while." She pulled a thick, leather-bound sketchbook from under the chair. Inside were pages covered in symbols, each one darker and more jagged than the last. "It's drawn to what's captured in its likeness. If you can trap its reflection or image at the moment it's fully focused on you, it will be stuck there, until someone looks too long and sets it free again." The plan was dangerous. They would lure the figure into a single, confined space, the old east wing of the school, which had been closed off for renovations. Caleb would be ready with his sketchpad, Madison with her camera, and Evan with a flashlight to draw its attention. Ms. Greaves would stay outside the building, prepared to lock it once the thing was inside. The key, she told them, was not to break eye contact once it appeared, no matter what it did. That night, they returned to the school under a heavy sky, the air thick with the smell of rain. The east wing was silent except for the distant drip of water through the roof. They took their positions in the long, empty hallway, Caleb sitting cross-legged with his sketchpad, Madison crouched with her camera, Evan standing in the center, flashlight aimed at the far end. Minutes passed. Then the temperature dropped sharply, and the light at the far end of the hall flickered out. It stepped into view slowly, as if savoring the moment, taller than they remembered, its limbs unnaturally long, its head nearly brushing the ceiling. It moved without sound, but each step made the air feel heavier, harder to breathe. Evan's hand tightened around the flashlight. "Now," he whispered. Madison's finger hovered over the camera shutter. Caleb's pencil touched the page. The pale figure stopped, and turned its head, locking eyes with all three of them. The moment the pale figure's gaze locked on them, the hallway seemed to warp. The air thickened until every breath was a struggle. Caleb's pencil scraped frantically across the page, his hands trembling but precise, each stroke trying to capture the exact tilt of its head, the way its shadow bent at an impossible angle. Madison's camera shutter clicked in rapid bursts, each flash freezing the figure mid-step, its form jerking unnaturally in the light. It moved closer, and with each step, the overhead lights died behind it. Evan kept the flashlight beam fixed on its blank face, forcing himself not to blink. The thing seemed to feed on their attention, its limbs stretching longer, its presence swelling in the narrow corridor. Madison's final flashbulb popped, and for a fraction of a second, she swore its black mouth was curling upward in something like a smile. Caleb's sketch neared completion just as the figure stepped within arm's reach. He drew the final line, and in that instant, every sound stopped. The drip of water, the hum of the building, even their own breathing, vanished. The figure froze mid-step, its head twitching toward the page as if pulled by a thread. The pencil dropped from Caleb's fingers, and the sketchbook slammed shut on its own with a deafening snap. The lights in the hallway flickered back on. The air felt lighter, the suffocating pressure gone. They turned toward the far end of the hall, empty. No pale figure. Evan's flashlight beam swept over bare tiles. Madison clutched the camera, but when she checked the photos, every frame after the first was nothing but black. Caleb's sketchbook felt warm in his hands, almost pulsing. Ms. Greaves was waiting outside, and when she saw them, her expression was grim. "It's bound. For now," she said, glancing at the book. "Don't ever open it. Don't ever look." The three of them left the school without speaking, the storm finally breaking overhead. Weeks later, the east wing was sealed off completely. The sketchbook stayed locked in a metal box under Caleb's bed, untouched. But sometimes, late at night, he swore he could hear the faint sound of pages turning inside, slow, deliberate, and a whisper just quiet enough to make him wonder if he'd imagined it, almost free.